All right, 1, 2, 1, 2. Works. Maybe we can turn off the music now. And everyone who's still in the kitchen, please come to this area over here. Join us for the meetup. We're about to start. Yes, perfect. Oh my God, I'm so excited. This is like the event of the year for me, definitely. And I'm so happy that my friend Kevin got to come over to Estonia this year, and I'm excited to be sharing his story with you tonight. So thank you so much for coming. We had so many sign-ups for the event, so thank you for the support and this interest. I'm sure that after you leave this event, everyone is going to be super pumped, because Kevin is seriously one of the most intense guys that I've ever met in my life, and you're going to shortly be seeing him. So Kevin, come over here. Yay! Awesome.
So why are you using that thing?
Because
Here,
I had to get everyone.
I feel better. It's like a comfort thing, right? You're like, hey, I don't know. You're like holding something, right?
Oh my God!
I'm just kidding.
All right, come sit down with me.
No, I didn't think I was going to get to come today. I signed up last night, and I got this thing. It said I'm on the wait list. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, I already told Kevin that you're probably not going to make
recorded?
it. Yes, so
right, no
we're gonna. So be nice.
I know.
Be nice. It's gonna be.
It's
seriously gonna be on YouTube forever. So there's no way you can take it off unless you go and work for YouTube at some point. But that's probably not gonna happen, because Kevin is definitely an entrepreneur from the heart, right?
From the heart.
Yeah. So what else can I say about Kevin? I was thinking about how can I start off with this meetup, and I was thinking that Kevin is truly an awesome guy that has been a big inspiration for me and Marco as the founders of Testlio since the beginning, seriously. So I don't know if any of you got to walk around in the office already, but we have 2 posters up in the office called "What Would Kevin Do?" And it's all because of the reasons, because Kevin has been so fast moving his entire career, and for him business is like a play.
Like a game.
It's like a game, yeah, exactly. It's really, truly like a game. And everything that he does seems to be so easy. And so today, I think I would love to dig deeper into your entrepreneurial journey, what inspires you, and then on the second hand, talk a little bit about maybe QA and the way you've built the products that you've made really successful. And so why Kevin is famous is because he's one of the earliest employees at Zimbra. Then after Zimbra, he went to work for a VC company called Redpoint Capital. They're like $1 billion fund, right? And he was an EIR there. And then from there, he continued building another email application called Accompli that amazingly got acquired by Microsoft after 18 months for maybe 200 million. He never confirms though. And then now he's been part of Microsoft now for about 2 years?
2.5 years.
Yeah, 2.5 years. And that's it. And one more thing. What's very interesting about him is that he grew up in a pig farm. So I think a lot of us Estonians can relate to this as well. Like we've done a lot of.
Is that like a common thing in Estonia, to farm pigs?
Our grandparents usually had like farms and like lots of animals there. So Kevin has built houses on his own as well.
I do none of that now. Let's be clear. That's why I did the computer thing, because it made computers super easy. You're like, wow, just sit in an office all day. It's air conditioning, free food and drinks. Like, it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, but seriously, I just want to purely know, like, what got you into technology?
That's a good question. You always lead it.
No,
if you always lead it, that it's like a pro trip. Whenever, like, it gives you a chance to think, right? Always say that's a good question. What I'm actually saying is, holy shit, I have no idea. Let me think about it. But if you say that, it's a great thing. What got me into tech? So I don't know. Like early on, when I was a kid. I don't know, growing up in like the 80s or 90s, my dad bought like this computer, and it had like 2 disk drives, and we would stick things in it, and he put the box there, and we couldn't really use it or open it until we read all the instructions. And so he gave us the book, and we read all the instructions, and he's like, how are you going to set it up? And we knew exactly where everything going, because we'd spent like weeks studying this stupid manual. And then because my parents knew nothing about computers really, other than like, hey, some of his other dad friends were like buying them for their kids, and it sounded like a good thing that we should learn. And my dad was a pilot, so he didn't really, he's like, the plane works on computers, so like maybe you should learn about them. And so then we just learned on it. We played games and wrote little programs. Back in the day, we had to write like little cassette tapes. I wasn't old enough to do like the punch cards, like the super old stuff, but like we did cassette tapes. And yeah, I don't know. Then from there, and then we didn't have really internet. We had this like dial-up modem stuff that was really slow. And then when I got to college, and we got to college, and then we had that thing called the internet, and we plugged in. You're like, whoa, that's fast. And so we started sharing music, right? That was the first thing we did. And then the internet just kind of obsessed me after that. Yeah, because I was going to do a mechanical engineering. My degree is actually mechanical engineering. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go build cars and airplanes because that stuff's awesome. And then I got them like this computer stuff's way easier. Because like, you know, you're like, dude, build a car. It's like 5 years and you build this thing and you worked on the door handle, right?
So now when you look back, do you still think it's way easier than building a software company?
Yeah. Like building an airplane, like can you, I mean, my brother worked at Boeing for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
Or something like that, it's 11 years. But like from the time he started until the time he left, he was working on the 787 and he was in IT, right? He was like, he managed the application monitoring for the software that managed the part replacement for the 787 that hadn't been released. And I'm like, what? And like, but if it goes down, then they can't get the part for the plane that hasn't been released. But yeah, they're testing them, so they still need to get the parts quickly. And you know, so like, he was like even in the software side of an airplane company, and that was still like, dude, I wanted to die. Like that, just the speed was so slow. Where like in the internet, like the web world, right? Like you make a change in JavaScript, reload, script error, right? Okay, script error, right? And then it works. You're like, okay, cool. Like the satisfaction is way, like for my personality was just way better. And it's a little slower in mobile, but not as anywhere near like building a car and airplane, like, you know. And this is probably a bad joke, but like when things were really going bad and like email, and I've done some really bad things with email falling over and like emails getting deleted and sitting in front of an audience like this. It was a bunch of teachers at Georgia Tech, and we had rolled out their email system, and we had this weird bug where if any person touched the recurring event, it would delete it for everybody. And this bug went on for months. And so they were all there to basically, the IT people are like, hey, you don't understand how pissed people are. And we're like, oh yeah, we don't understand. We'll fly out to Georgia. We'll make it all better. So we went to Atlanta. And I could just come to this room. And we come to this room, and it was like a room like this. And they'd invited the whole staff. They were all pissed. They're like, yeah, the guys that built it are going to be here. Come yell at them. And so we sat there for an hour. And we thought we were just meeting with the IT, person, like, hey, the two IT No, we sat there with the whole teachers. And they're like, I had this class schedule, and it until some kid touched it, and it deleted it. And, so it was super painful. But you think through all that, like you can fix it. Like it's solvable, right? We did figure it out and fix it. And you have this incredible responsibility because today at Microsoft, like the pilots that fly the planes for Alaska Airlines get their schedules and maintenance requests, an incredibly important thing, right? The hospitals. So like there is criticality to what we do, but the ability to both break it and fix it quickly is way easier than it would be if you worked in the physical world or building kind of hardware products and things like that. So I don't know. So I think software is easier. Like clearly building companies is hard. Like there's all kinds of challenges to it. But
let's talk about it.
Yeah, but the speed that way you can do it, like it's more fun, like to do things and make change and see stuff happen versus like sitting there for 11 years and hoping the 787 will finally launch. I mean, it did. It's a great airplane. I think I rode on one on the way over. But like, and then the thing is, like, I don't even know. Like, what kind of plane did you ride on the last time you flew a plane? Do you like know exactly what kind of? No, you're like, well, whatever.
Yeah, you never know.
I mean, hopefully you know the email app you're using. Some people clearly don't. Like, we ask them, like, what do you use for email? I don't know. I use my phone. No. With the app. What app do you use? No, I just use my phone. Yeah, is it Outlook? I don't know what the IT guy installed. Yeah, so there is some corollary in the software world, but hopefully not.
So after college, you graduated UCLA, right?
Finally, yeah.
Finally.
Yeah, so it was funny because like my second internship or last internship, whatever, I was getting bored. I was working at this software company that was building software for mechanical engineering. So my job was to go in and like actually QA the software. So they'd be like, oh, here's a heat transfer model, and I'd do the calculation.
So that's where you first did QA.
Yeah, I was testing, and it sucked, right? Because I was like super hard, because you're like testing it, and I'm like, I want to go fix the bugs, right? And so then, how do you find the good bugs and fix it? And so yeah, I was doing testing, like literally my first internship. My second internship, I was like, I don't want to do an internship, so I started looking on Craigslist and found this company interviewing for an HTML programmer, because I thought I knew HTML. And I went and interviewed, and then they sent me an offer letter, and it was like a full-time job, and I was like, oh, that was an internship. But they didn't ask if I graduated. So I didn't tell them. So I accepted the job, went to work. And then 3 months later, I had to go back to school. And so I was like, okay, I got to go, and I'm managing like the web team, like, small startup, right? So it grew really fast. It's like 10 people now. I'm under my team. And I was like, I got to go back to school.
You were out of college.
I was not out. I was like for
you
summer.
You were still in college and you were already managing a team.
Yeah, because it's one of these, fix the bugs, make it faster. And they're like, well, this guy has the answer, so maybe he'll just be in charge, right? Like, it's kind of like this, I always talk when I talk to college students, they're like, well, how do you promote yourself? Or you don't. Like, you just like, people start asking you questions, and the person in the office, like, if the internet went out right now, there's probably 1 or 2 people we'd call. Like, if the internet went out in this office, there's probably 1 or 2 people somewhere sitting in here that's like, oh, we're going to go talk to that guy. He's going to go fix the internet, right? And like, if you become that woman or guy during like your chunk of work, like you just kind of become that naturally the leader. And whether that's the manager kind of boss relationship or the architect or the principal, like, and it's kind of just becoming that person. Like, oh, like I have an HR complaint. Like there's somebody in here that does HR. You're like, oh, there she is. And boom, you just like, that's where you go. And so how do you become that person? That's how I stumbled into managing people. And then I told them, I'm like, sorry, I got to go back to school. And they're like, well, you're managing this team. I'm like, I don't know. You didn't ask. I didn't ask. Whatever. And so I'm like, hey, well, I can do school 2 days a week. Why don't you let me work 3 days a week? So they're like, all right. So I did that. So I just worked 3 days a week, went to school the other 2. And then about a year later, they came to me and they go, hey, I thought you were going to go back to graduate. I'm like, oh, yeah, I did 3 months, 4 months ago. And they're like, well, you going to come back to working full time? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. I can start on Monday, Then nobody asked, right? So I was just taking 2 days off. It was kind of cool. But so I did that. And then, of course, like, you kind of like writings on the wall. What happened to that company, right? They went out of business.
But seriously, where
startup.
did you get this hunger for doing something really quick?
I don't know.
Like
I get bored
being
really
in
easy.
college.
Yeah, I don't know. I just get bored.
Where is it coming from?
I don't know. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's way easier than feeding pigs. That's what I'm like, dude. Like, can you imagine like go feeding pigs? You're like, no, just go and like do cool stuff, right? So
just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And you can implement things really quicker. And then what happened after that?
Oh, dude.
So you went to work
so that
for
company
this
went out of
company.
business. So like on Friday, they're like, hey, company meeting. And we'd had tons of layoffs, right? Like 400, 200, 100, 12. Right?
And you were still in the 12.
Like that's another thing, right? You're a survivor,
Impressive.
right? You're like made it down to 12, and you're the manager, you're the boss, you're the janitor, you're at all the jobs at that point. And
how
they
do
were
you
like,
feel about this as well?
so it was a good lesson. I'll tell you about that one after that. Quickly tell the story. But so yeah, they're like, hey, got a lunchtime meeting. Everybody come in, quick meeting for lunch, and they had these envelopes, and everybody got an envelope. And the CEO's like, hey, this is your last paycheck, and we're gonna file for bankruptcy in about 3 hours. So go to the bank and cash it right now, because after 5, you won't be able to cash it for many weeks because it'll be in bankruptcy and you have to go fight for yourself. I mean, you'll get it because that's salary comes off first and stuff that I learned later. But so we all raced down to the bank, Bank of Santa Monica in LA, and 12 of us, right? And we're all, 11 actually. The CEO didn't come. I think it's kind of bummed at that day, right? And so we're all cashing checks. About 8 of us in there, like, we're out of cash. We're like, what do you mean you're out of cash? Like, well, we just don't have. We're like, because he said to cash it. They're like, well, we didn't have bank accounts there, and so we had to go to 2 other banks, and then we just went and drank all night and complete debauchery. But yeah, the lesson there is the way I tell that lesson is, I don't know, like in college, but like here, but in college in the U.S., they have these kegs, like a beer keg or whatever, right? And like when you have a party, like some person who's adult's friend or whatever will get a keg for a bunch of underage kids or whatever that shouldn't be drinking to drink, and they'll put the keg there, and then somebody controls the tap. And so in the U.S., we call that the keg master, whoever's holding the tap, like who's got the button, and like, so, it's like and everybody drinks out of these red cups, like these cheap plastic cups, right? And so all the cups are like, this, and one person sitting there filling it up. And so the lesson was like, you got to be the keg master, right? So the person that controls the resources kind of wins, because you instantly become the friend. Like the next day on campus, they're like, hey, well, good, I saw you last night, or oh, I remember you from last night, because you're filling the beers, right? You're filling all their beers. But then the story goes on a little bit farther, is that as the party starts to wind down, there's always like a few people lingering out, and bad things always happen at the end. The police come, it's too loud, like somebody throws up on the floor, and we're like, dude, that's a bummer, like you got to clean it up. If you would have left earlier. So the lesson there is like, don't be the last one at the party. So when you see like, and so when you see a company or you're in a group, like, so this works in big companies and little companies. Like in little companies, like, oh, well, all the smart people are gone. I'm now the boss. And you're like, and so I was a kid. I was like, this is awesome, dude. Like everybody's leaving. I'm like in charge. I'm like running this whole department. Well, there's nobody here, but I'm running it. But like, but the trick was like, oh, and all the people that I knew that were awesome, that I worked with, that were super happy as my colleagues, like left. And so I was like, I should have left too. And so that's and so now I've seen that in big companies where you're like in a group and like a huge division, and the division kind of whittles down, and you're like, well, I'm the boss of the littler division. But then, eventually they'll either lay everybody off or shut it. It's never a good sign. So don't be the last one at the party.
Aww. But it was a good lesson.
It's a good lesson. Yeah, there's like 12 of them. I should go through them all one day. But that's a different talk.
It probably hasn't never happened to you after that, right?
Got laid off?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually got fired from VMware, so yeah. I think you knew that. That was a trick question. So I got laid off again.
Might be some trick questions.
I know, but that one's a little different. So that one, the angle was a little different. So we had sold Zimbra to Yahoo, and then Yahoo sold it to VMware, and then we were at VMware, and then it had kind of run its life there. It was a startup that was great, but just never fit in wherever it landed. And so they were like, hey, we're going to sell it again to like a private equity firm and offload the asset. Because the nice thing about email is how many people like to switch email servers? Like if anybody in IT, it's like, it sucks. Like email, hey, let's switch from Google Apps to Microsoft Office or from Office to, to Exchange or whatever. It's just super painful. And so, you get very like wedded to that platform. And so Zimbra had all these customers that were still paying us because it was very hard to switch off of it. It's just painful. It's not worth it. And so they're like, hey, we're going to sell the business. And I was like, nah, I'm not going. Like, that's 8 years. I've been riding this train. I'm like, there's going to be no good kind of like having this asset get sold. And so I refused to leave. And then they're like, you need to go. Too many good ideas, I guess, for them. And so they were like, since you're not staying, you need to lay your team off. And then we're going to lay you off. And I was like, well, I'm not laying the team off. And so I just left-ish. Like, they gave me the paperwork. And I was like, I know what that is. I'm not signing it. See you later.
But so how did it happen that you became part of Zimbra first off? So that was in 2004 when you started having these conversations, joining Zimbra, right?
Yeah, to go back. So
does everyone know what Zimbra is?
It's like an email server. It's like a Linux-based email server that competed against Exchange and lost.
And they were sold to
Yahoo
for
350 million.
350 million. And Kevin was one of the first. You were one of the first
I was
people
early,
there.
yeah.
So how did you get there?
How did I get there? So Satish Dharmaraj, who is the VC in Acompli, was the CEO of that company, and he had been in a company where I met my wife, who's somewhere hiding in the audience.
I think she's there.
She moved. She's hiding.
Oh, she moved already.
Now she's not going to raise her hand. She's definitely embarrassed now. So I was at this company called OpenWave. It was like doing software for carriers, and I got there like my first week. This is after I got laid off from my company in LA. I got hired, and they paid for me to move to Northern California, where my brother was living. And the first thing we did is they said, hey, I'm working in this. I was like in a bug fixing group, so it's kind of like QA. It was like more like the patch group. So like when the customer would report a problem, they're like, hey, the good engineers are too busy to fix bugs, so we have this special group that fixes bugs, which is, this is a traditional like enterprise model. Like, and I was like, this is gross. Like, I'd never run a company like that, but I was like, whatever, I'm here. I need a job, so I took the job, and I was the first person on the team. And so we're sitting in a room, 10, 12 people, and one of our big customers at the time was British Telecom in London or wherever it is. Well, that office was in Belfast, which was weird because that's where our office was, but it was British Telecom. And so they're like, hey, they're having problems. This is like mobile, like way back in the day with like these super crappy WAP WML phones where like it's like HTML but really, really worse, and it ran on these little phones that were like the worst Android phone, like than -10. It was really bad phones, underpowered, like pixelated screens, like it had like T9, you had to pump the character 3 times, like to get like every letter. They didn't even have keyboards, right? And so they're like, hey, there's lots of bugs on this. This customer's got 14 bugs, and they're super complaining. And like all the kind of QA people and all the executives sit in the room, and I'm like sitting in the back because I barely could get a chair. Like I'm the lowest person in the total. I'm the one that when they find the bug, I got to go eventually try to fix it. And they're like, hey, we need somebody to fly out to the customer, and fix all these bugs. And I'd been there a week, so I didn't really know anything. But I'll do it. And the guy was like, wait, who are you? And they're like, hey, this new guy. He just started. And they're like, you can fix them? And I'm like, sure. Like, I was like, whatever, I could try. Like, I don't know. Like, that's my job to fix bugs. Like, I'll try. And so I went down to Barnes & Noble's, bought a book on WML. I didn't know jack about it. Read the book on the plane. It was a long flight, right? 10-hour flight, 11 hours to London. Read the book. I got there, and they didn't tell me, but like, this is an awesome thing about Europe. There's always these holidays, right? And so I get there, and like it's a bank holiday, like in Belgium, and so I'm like, sweet, this is cool. So the day I'm supposed to show up and work, nobody's working, right? So finally found one of the QA persons, and she brought over like a sack of like these shitty phones, and handed me the sack of phones and says, here it is. And I'm like, I've got this spreadsheet with all the list of bugs, and so I'm like trying to figure out how it works, get the thing working, and it's like dial up, CDMA, like GSM, like Edge, like all, it was before Edge. It was like, what is it, like 3? The thing would connect. You could feel the phone connecting. It was like, and it would like, oh, connects, and the page would start loading. It was just terrible. And so that day I sat there in my hotel room, for, I don't know, 12, 14 hours, whatever. And I fixed like 6 of them. And it was all hacks. Like, if I see this, do that, and just don't do the bad thing. Like, the worst, I mean, just the grossest code you've ever written. But I got them working. So the next morning, I'm like, how's it doing? I'm like, well, I got a couple fixed. And I'm like, let's just run through the tests and see what happens. Because 2 of them I couldn't reproduce. So that would have gave me 8 out of 12. So we ran through it, and 8 out of 12 were fixed. And the guy was like, whoa, this guy's magic. And so, like, and then they get on the conference call, and all the execs is, all right, first day status. Like, what are we going to do? Like, what's the plan for the week? And they're, well, he's got 8 done. And they're like, he what? And then they're all texting me, hey, how'd you do it? And yeah, so that was it. So I learned WML that way. I don't know. And then so that's how I got to Zimbra. That was sorry, that was a long story to get to how I got. And so because of that, when they started the company, they're like, we want this guy. Like, I don't know what it is, but he'll go figure it out because he's and I just tried, right? And I got, probably super lucky. But again, it's not that hard, right? You keep poking at it and keep trying, and the first 10 times are wrong.
Do you seriously think it's luck?
It's some of it is. You have to be willing to try and not be afraid to fail. Like, for sure, when I got back home and I had all 12 bugs fixed, the engineers literally laughed at me. They're like, this guy is the biggest joke. Like, he wrote in there, like, if, like, customer's user address, don't do this whole path of code. Fucking worked. I don't know. You guys figure it out, smarties. And so, and then I became the manager of that group. And then this is the best part. So these guys all started leaving to go to Zimbra. And I was like, no, I'm going to save my stock. I think it's a good deal. And I turned them down because I didn't really get the startup thing back then. I was like, the startup thing sounds risky. My parents were like, dude, that's the stupidest thing ever. Don't go do a startup. They don't have any money. I'm sure, like, if you joined a startup, you have your talk to your, like, significant other or somebody. They're like, you're going to what? Take a pay cut and go to a smaller company and all these other problems. And so, yeah, they came and offered me a job, and I was like, no, I'm good. I'm super comfortable here, and like running this team of like all the smart people are gone. I'm now the boss again. And so I made the same mistake sort of again. But then about 3 months later, I was like, no, I'm kidding. I'll go. And so I joined a little bit later. So I would have been even earlier, but I joined a little later. But then I get there and they're like, well, we're kind of big now. We're like 15 people. You got to be interviewed. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I've never interviewed in a while. So I start interviewing, and the guy calls me. He's like, well, 2 people said no. And I was like, what? All right, this will be fun. So they couldn't hire me. And so I was like, well, so I was going to be the manager of the web team because that was kind of my jam at the point. And they're like, well, we have this job, like evangelist. And I'm like, well, what do they do? And they're like, well, it's going to be an open source company, and we're going to need to go to like conferences and talk about our product in open source. Make it seem like open source, but talk about our product. All right, I'll do it. And so I joined. And like in most companies, like that's not as high of a job as like managing an engineering team. It's an awesome job and super important, like community manager. And so I turned it into an awesome job. I went to conferences, spoke, built the communities, built this huge forum, thousands of members, all these IT people. It turned into like a massive sales generator because I cookied the crap out of them because I was kind of a hack engineer. So I was shoving cookies in there every time people would come to the forums. It would track them, and then it would load it into Salesforce. And then so you had like the salespeople would look in, and they're like, oh, this prospect. And then it's like, they're like a prolific poster on our forum. They're like, we're going to sell to this person. And then I did one more little hack. This is fun. So when they would install, we had a free version of our service. When they would install it, they'd have to enter their email address to get the code. They'd enter the email address and email code, but it would also link it back to Salesforce. And so then we would know which service went to which user, like admin. And then as they added all the users, we'd know how big the customer was. Because they'd go and like migrate all their users. They're like, oh, they're using our free product with 30,000 employees. Like, that's a good one. Let's go fish after that one. Versus most IT people would install it, and it's like him and his like brother. So it's like a 2-person domain, like not interesting to go chase that person down in free software. So, and then about 6 months later, those people that said no, I was their boss. So then I was managing the engineering team.
Did you ever feel bad when you were turned down for the job?
No, see, that's another good trick. Like, I mean,
Did you know why you were turned down for this job?
Yeah, they said, dude, we saw that guy write code. He's a complete hack. He's a joker. Like, and my code's never been good. That's why I do this and not code anymore. But yeah, like I solved the problem. I just don't have the patience to write it correctly, I guess is part of the problem. But yeah, so they were like, yeah, his JavaScript sucks. He couldn't even write code. I'm like, well, I hadn't been writing code for 3 years. I was managing you guys. And then they're like, yeah, well, you can't write code. Just a small company. We need you to write code. So I was like, all right, well, I'll wait. So I joined the thing and became their boss anyways.
Wow.
And then they were like drunk one night in the bar, and they're like, yeah, we were, and they admit, I knew who it was, but they finally like, yeah, we were the ones, we said you couldn't join, and we think you're cool now, and we see why we needed you. It's like, we didn't know at the time. We thought we were so overwhelmed with work. They didn't want to add like a manager because there was only 4 of them. They're like, we don't need a manager. We need like a helper to help like work. And so I think their point was valid at the time. but we worked it out. And
but did you ever feel like, oh, maybe I should become better at writing code and being more precise? Or
see, that's one way to think of it. So I took it a different way, though.
I think people tend to think that, okay, like if I was turned down, maybe I should push myself harder into doing something that maybe I'm not that good at. Did it definitely?
Yeah, so I think of push myself harder, but not necessarily to like, I might not necessarily have to go learn to code. I'm like, well, I'm going to go figure out how to get in there and figure something else out. So I get bummed out when people tell me no. Like when we started Acompli, like I was playing golf with two of my really good friends, and they're like, an email app? Really? I'm like, yeah, we're going to go and get some funding next week. And they're like, what's wrong with the one I have on my, like, oh, no, I'm like, no, it's for the phone. And they're like, I know, I have a phone. It does email today. Like, I have an iPhone. It's great. And I was like, no, it's going to be better. It's going to have all these cool things. And they're like, dumb. So they're like, and so like, to me, that was incredibly motivating. I was like, yeah, it's super dumb. It's super dumb. Like, so dumb, we're going to build it, and then it's awesome. So like those kind of things, like you just keep them. And like, even to this day, I'm like, oh, it's so dumb. So dumb. But like, it feels really good because you're like, yeah. So like when people tell you it's a bad idea, like I actually find that now like perversely more motivating than like, because if you agree with me, I'm like, oh, now you're just being nice, or you don't know what you're talking about. But if you're like, challenge me and tell me it's wrong, like, I don't know. My sense is that there's something there. Because it's like when you get into a debate with somebody and you start arguing, like, if they don't care, like if you're like, hey, Kevin, I think I'm going to paint my hair pink. And I'm like, all right, whatever. Like, I don't care. Like, you're like, whatever, do your thing. But if I'm like, that's the worst idea, that's terrible, like they care, right? Like you've actually incited emotion, then they care. And then when they care, like that's kind of a great way to like have a discussion.
That's true. But seriously, when I think back in founding Testlio, then we went through the Techstars Accelerator, and over the first, so the program is about 3 months, and over the first month you meet like 90 different mentors and entrepreneurs and investors. Some of them will talk a lot good about your company, and then the others are like, you should just dump this idea, it doesn't get you anywhere. And for me it was super hard, and then I cried almost every night, and then Marco had to support me and say like, everything is gonna be fine, we're gonna get through this. But I was definitely...
And now look, it's like a party in here. This is awesome. I can't even get into my own event. This is kind of cool. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Balling it up.
Because yeah, for me it was totally different in terms of like thinking about finding the companies and finding motivation when someone doesn't believe in you. But then at some point you think that, okay, you need to have like, you need to focus on the people that really are going to use your product and get their feedback, because their feedback is the one that is going to matter.
And again, everybody motivates differently. Like, I have friends that are like these marathon runners, and they just go out and like when they're like get beat down, they're like, I'm just going to go run. And I was like, dude, that sounds painful.
Yeah.
But that's what they, so everybody has their jam on like what makes them in terms of how you figure out and deal with defeat. But I think all entrepreneurs figure out that like struggle, right? And some people have this great like externality of like, oh, we're super extroverted and everything's awesome. It's like, no, dude, like most things suck. You're like, this is hard, that's hard, But how do you deal with that, right? And how do you expose it, and who do you open up to? And I think everybody has people like mentors that you talk to, or like people that you confide in, where you're like, hey, this is painful and this is not good, right? And
have you always had mentors while you were building out your career, and then when you became an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I don't think I was smart enough to know that they were mentors, honestly. Like I don't, I wouldn't like say, oh, like I go to this person, they're a mentor. It's like, oh, I'm just drinking beer with them and telling my stories, and they're like, oh, yeah, whatever. Like, but and then they're giving you tips, and you're like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Like, you just you're having a conversation, or like I talked to my dad, and everything's like not good enough. Like he's like a super pro of like, oh, that's good. You got 10? I think you should have got 12. Like, oh, 200 million. Is that all? Like, yeah. I'm like, well. So then I start to like manage expectations, where I'm like, oh, I got 12. He's like, oh, is that all? I'm like, it's just kidding, got 15. Like, and so then you're like, you can kind of like play the game backwards. But I think, you learn from all of those experiences, and like how you use. And I think today I don't know, my ego's a little lower. And so I can go back and think of like, because part of it's like, you're like, oh, I know everything or whatever. I don't need mentors, and like, but these people are actually mentors to you, and I learn a ton from you guys, right? Like we have in common. That's why whenever I'm with Marco and Kristel, I'm always asking like, hey, how's this working? How'd this work? How'd that work? And it's partly I'm just super, super curious of like the game of startups, and like everyone's different. Like, how do you hire this, or why did you do this, or this office is pimp, like why did you do this, or like whatever. Like every little thing, like those are just tips that you can learn. Like how, like I was telling Marco, like those tables like that he built, like, or his buddy built, like super pimp design, like really cool. And I was like, we went to IKEA and we just built them out. And then we had some like like funky industrial stuff that my contractor built. Like, well, we didn't like think that like about it. And one of our earlier startup kind of rent-a-spaces, they had a vibe manager. And I'm like, a what? A vibe man. It like managed the vibe. So he like, this guy Jason was incredible at like throwing parties and knowing like, not just load the fridge with beer, load the fridge with beer that beer people know is good beer. Like, and all these little things. Like, it's kind of like when you're really good at throwing a party. Like, my wife's always like, oh, don't do that. You know, like, don't have trash cans out. And I was like, what? Like, come on, trash cans, they can put trash. She's like, no, like, because then you want like, if you have servers at the party, you want the servers to like manage it so that they're taking the trash, and you want that to be invisible. You don't want to seem like there's trash everywhere. Like, and so like little things like that, and like that some people notice. And so I think those are all like just great like mentor type pro tips that you can pick up, and you can learn from everybody. I have another friend that whenever he's over, he's always like, hey, I want to learn something today. And he'll like start asking questions. And it's like, but he's super explicit about saying, I want to learn something today. Like, and so he'll either bring a challenge or saying, hey, I want your input on this. And he, knowing that you may or may not have the answer he wants or he wants to hear, but he feels that he can learn from that and pick up from that. And I think it's a trait that I think is entrepreneurs that are successful end up finding that somewhere, whether they're explicit about that, but constantly learning and evolving, because every situation is different. And, you know, I've managed all kinds of size teams, small and large, and been in like super complex discussions and super like fun discussions. But all of those, how you approach it and how you kind of like swing the vibe and like where you think things are going to go is really important. And I think, and it's the little things that you kind of pick up along the way that, I don't know.
Yeah, building companies is truly tough because you're dealing with people and emotions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to talk more about this. Like I have more questions about this. So, but my last question about Zimbra. So when exactly did you leave?
So,
2000.
Yeah, well, so Zimbra was like, so Zimbra got bought by Yahoo, then Yahoo sold to VMware, and then VMware laid me off. And then, or fired me, whatever. It was officially a layoff, but they essentially fired me. Like, you don't lay off people that are that senior, you kind of fire them. But they said it nicely. And then, so I left, and then I went to join Redpoint as an EIR, and so that was in, I don't know, whatever.
And so how was the transition from Zimbra to VMware when you were acquired by VMware?
Yeah, every acquisition was different. I think the biggest lesson that we did correct with Acompli into Microsoft that I personally was a disaster at, bringing Zimbra into Yahoo and then Zimbra again into VMware, is we went in and like, I am entrepreneur, I am startup guy, you bought us, so we're going to tell you how to do things, and we know how our business works, and so we're super, super overconfident in what we did, and kind of like, oh, you're just this big business, like you must be wrong because you had to pay money to buy us to be here. And we did this thing called the 300 move. I don't know if you have seen the movie, like the Gladiator, like 300, where they all put the shields up and like all the arrows come in. And they're like, they basically win by just guarding themselves and circling and not engaging with anybody. So that was our move. So anytime a person from Yahoo or VM would roll in, we'd all just be like, yup. And just like ignore them, block them out, decline the meeting, whatever it was, we didn't engage. Because we're like, we got this. We're the startup people. And in both cases, in Yahoo, we got lucky in the sense that, you know, Yahoo was more of a disaster than we were, surprisingly, and still made it another 6 years after that, which is shocking, and still somehow alive. Like, I still use it to test my internet's working, you know, Yahoo. But so they sold us to VMware, and then we got into VMware, and VMware was very successful, and they had this multi-billion-dollar flywheel called vSphere that would just print money. And so we were this little turd of a startup that made like our $50 million was nothing to them. And so it didn't make sense to sales. We never engaged, and that was a super negative like experience in that integration. And we thought that was fine, but if, you know, in both cases, Yahoo essentially kicked us out. We got sold, so it sort of got a, you know, it was like a soft landing into VMware. But then VMware just disabled us, and so all the people that worked for us, all of my team, like my friends, they all either got laid off or shoved into crappy jobs because we did a bad job like making friends and like well integrating. And we were like, we went so far, like we would fight for crazy stuff. We would be like and say, oh, we're at Zimbra. We're like, we're not taking VMware business cards. We need to print new ones that say Zimbra on them. We're not taking business cards. They're like, well, we ordered them, throw them all away. And so we made them print all new business cards for us. And they did it. Like, it's crazy, right? Like, what they'll do. And so you think you're winning, but it was a complete, like, bad move, because then they're like, oh, it's the Zimbra guy with his stupid Zimbra card and like, you know, and your Zimbra email. And like, we went into Microsoft, we deleted our Comply accounts. We were like, we're Microsoft people. We, completely dissolved our identity as a startup and said, no, we're Microsoft, we're Outlook. This is our thing. And have tons of friends up and down the org. Like, we've had incredible retention on the team. Like, everybody's still there, minus a couple people. But I think basically the team is whole, and we're well integrated. And the 19 people that we came in with is now 120, 150 it'll be this year. We just added a bunch. So, I mean, it's a huge team that we've grown around it. And we have tons of friends all through the org at every different level, from support to, engineering services to executive marketing. Everybody's like, because we're like friendly, and we're like, hey, we come up and meet people. I fly to Seattle a ton. I travel a ton. But completely like not that I don't have an ego anymore and think that I'm still awesome, but did it in a way where like I'm like trying to be helpful instead of coming in and saying I have the answer, let me tell you about it. It's like, hey, I'm here to learn. Like, it's all a small question. Like, tell me, what are your problems? How can I help?
You've probably gotten this from Satya, because
Satya is a pro. Yeah, for
he's
sure.
Always like one of the key videos that I most remember, and one of the quotes is that don't be know-it-all, learn it all. So maybe he has inspired
He's inspired me for sure. He's super, super inspiring dude. And like, but this notion of like is incredibly alarming. And so like when I meet with people now, I'm always like, how can I help? And it's like the easiest like throwaway question, but it's incredibly disarming for the other person. Even if it's like you're meeting them for the first time, or like you come in and somebody's like, I need a one-on-one with you. And you're like, oh shit, this is gonna suck, right? And then you're just like, how can I help? And then they're all pissed about something, but then they're like, wait, I wanted to tell you that I'm pissed. And then I'm like, no, I want to help. But if they just tell me that they're pissed, it completely changes the conversation. Or you go to somebody who's like, I'll get lots of external companies or vendors that want to meet with me. Hey, I'd love to get a meeting and get 10 minutes of your time. Yeah, no problem. How can I help? And then they're all ready to convince me of something. And I'm like, no, how can I help you? Like, I'm just ready to help you. And then it's a pro, like, that's my kind of opener now when I meet new people is how can I help? So I don't know, kind of works.
Nice. I think
for me,
it's something that we should all adapt at some level.
Easy way to learn.
Yeah, exactly. So now let's go to the story of Comply, because I think that's the most compelling and most exciting to talk about the way you built the product, how fast you released the product, and how did you end up selling it for about 200 billion. That's what the press was saying.
Yeah. They're mostly
so let's talk about that. So you were in EIR, Entrepreneur in Residence, for a VC company, and then you got together with your guys who built Zimbra, and you decided to build this company.
Yeah.
Why this idea, and why these founders?
And it's super random. Like, not random, I guess, but I'd been doing email for a long time, and I was like, I'm definitely not doing an email company. I'm going to do something different. And I was having a chat with Satish, the venture guy that funded us initially, and Dropbox had just bought this company called Mailbox. It was like this big wait list, and like they had this really cool video where like this girl's walking in the world and she's like swiping her emails away and like, oh, email's so awesome, and then like slips her email in her pocket and then it's like, oh, I'm back on my hike, like, and I was like, and then they bought them for like 80 million or something. It ended up getting a lot less, I think, when things shook out, but it was, they got acquired, and we're like, but they had only built for Gmail, and I was like, that's weird, because we at Zimbra knew the question that if you build email and you're trying to beat Gmail, like Gmail's a free product, like winning against a free product is not fun. Like there's, and then Exchange was actually where all the money was. All of the people that pay lots of money for email run Microsoft. And so we're like, well, why don't they just take the Mailbox thing, but build that for Microsoft and Gmail so it works for both, because I have a Gmail account personally, but everywhere I work, including Redpoint, runs on Exchange. And Satish's like, you guys could build that? I'm like, oh yeah, we could build that. And he's like, all right, why don't you guys come to the partner meeting on Monday and pitch it? I'm like, okay, whoa. And so then we went and built a quick demo. I hired some Odesk people, banged out some shitty JavaScript and a UI, and had some random UI designer build a little app that looked like a mail thing and put some cool swipes in it. It was all JavaScript, super janky, but it worked. And Javier wrote a server that talked to the Exchange server. And we went and demoed basically, hey, we have an app that talks to your Exchange server, and here's what we're going to build. And then we had 9 slides that walked through me, Javier, JJ, the 3 founders, the vision, like we're going to go build this email thing and make it talk to both, and we need $5 million to do it, and they said yes.
What was their biggest concern? Did they have any concerns at this point? when you were pitching the idea and you had built an app over the weekend, pretty much with people from Upwork, which is a
Odesk,
freelancing
Upwork,
community.
yeah, exactly. They, I mean, I think this is hard to remember. Like you think is awesome. You're like, we got the 5 million. You're like, forgot all the questions. But
was it 5 million?
They gave us 5,
Oh,
and then
they
we
gave
raised.
5,
Then we raised a couple more after that. I think the questions were around monetization because there was like 50 other email apps out there, and none of them made money. They were all like 1 and 2 person shops and relatively small. And they mostly worked on Gmail, and nobody really paid for it. And so the best model we came up with was like, there's all these companies that pay for BlackBerry or Good, which was like these 2 enterprise email technologies, and they pay lots of money for like super enterprisey people to have like super secure email, like if you're in finance or medical. And so we're like, those are both like $400 or $500 million businesses, like so growing to $1 billion. We're like, we think we can go take a penny off that or whatever and get our 100 million off that. And they're like, I don't know, like, and so that was probably the biggest question. And then one of the venture capitalists that didn't invest that we talked to actually said, well, why wouldn't Microsoft just build that? And we're like, I don't know. We didn't really think about it, but maybe they didn't. I think the big reason is and it's sort of as we figured out, they make so much money on the server and they're so successful that it was kind of distracting and hard for them to go build a pure play client that worked on a phone that they didn't own, right? So the Windows Phone was awesome, and they were so dedicated to Windows Phone for so many years. Their email experience on Windows Phone was awesome, and they sort of almost they didn't bring Office, they didn't bring any of their apps to iPhone and Android because they, those are going to fail. Windows Phone's going to be successful, but then get to that point, and now Nokia's failed, Windows Phone's, failed. I guess we can say that clearly now.
Yep.
Without getting like in trouble. Like I'm like, I work there. Can I? Like, yes, I can say that. And then, but like, so the 2 dominant platforms were Google and Apple, and they didn't have a solution there, right? And so, so that we said, hey, let's go build it. And so we built it on iPhone, and so it was for stuff that we wanted to, something I wanted to use myself. Like, and we said, okay, let's do it, and we did it. So yeah, we raised the money. I don't know. Do you have more questions? Or should I just tell the whole story?
Tell the story. Yeah, just tell the story.
I keep talking. I know.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
we have
super
some
terrible. I'm like, feel like we should be serving beer, like it's like long, like an intermission.
Hey, it's very easy with Kevin because I don't have to ask too many questions. You just talk, and you have so many.
Go tell my wife that. Like, she'll be like, no, too many answers, too many solutions. No, she's awesome. So we basically hired a bunch of our friends that did email, and Javier kept saying, dude, no more Zimbros. Like the Zimbra people. He's like, no more Zimbros. And we're like, no, these guys don't email. This is our crew. We know how to do it. And so we hired a lot of Zimbros, so people that had done email before. And then we hired a lot of new people because Zimbra didn't know anything about clients. It was not a mobile company. It was a Web 2.0. JavaScript is the future, web-based email, Linux, and all this that was the fancy stuff back in early 2000s. And so we had to hire some really good iOS and Android developers, which we did. And then we ran into...
How did you know that they were good?
It's hard. So we had to ask a lot of questions. I interviewed about 150 iOS developers to hire 3. And 2 of the ones that we hired knew each other. So on the Android side, probably about 90 developers interviewed, and that's like getting through like the recruiter. We had our own recruiter, and so she would get through the first thing, and then I would like get them on a phone screen. So most of those were phone screens. We probably interviewed in person in the office 20.
Yeah, hiring is super tough. Like there's a story from one of our investors, portfolio companies. They hired Stanford graduate out of school and made an offer, like a very high offer. I think they offered the engineer like 120 out of college on the first year. And then this guy doesn't show up for the first day. And they just call him and say like, hey, dude, what's up? Like, why did you show up for work? It's your first day. And this guy was like, hey, I got another offer. I'm at this other company now.
It's crazy
That's how it is in Silicon Valley. It's very competitive.
It's crazy.
That's why I'm asking like how.
Yeah, so what did our trick,
you
we were super super selective at some level. So that, I think why we ran. We had tons of great people. And 2 of our best engineers never went to college. Got out of high school, self-taught. And so like I'm all about fancy schools. I didn't really go to one, but like it was I went to okay school, but like somebody's listening probably like, oh, it's my school. So we said like, are you interested in the work? And so we would give this project out and test them, and like you kind of got the vibe of like how hard do you work, and then we would ask. My co-founder JJ is probably the one to thank because he was the one that flushed the most people, and he would ask them an incredibly simple problem. Well, what he thought was like basically implement. I'm gonna give the problem on it. Probably I'll say it. So basically implement stir. I'm looking at that thing because I'm thinking like imagining it writing on the whiteboard. And even to this day, if you ask me the problem, I could not get the problem right. And I know what exactly the question is, and I've probably given this interview, I don't know, 100 times. But I'm just not that good at programming, so I don't know. But yeah, so it was implement stir, which is like a basic C function in coding. And it's like 8 lines. And then it's a recursive way to do it. And then we'd say implement it with a star pattern. And most programmers today that claim to be programmers can't do like really, really low, like just a basic, like hard program. Because they're so common of copy and paste code or like looking on server fault. And that was the way I code, by the way. So I'm like beating myself. Yeah, that's the way I'm like, but we called them black box coders. Like you're not actually sure how it works. You just keep hammering code at it, refresh, recompile, refresh, recompile, refresh, recompile, refresh, recompile. Oh, I got it working. Oh, don't touch it. Shit, there's all kinds of bugs. Refresh, recode, that one's fun. Oh, I made another one. Refresh, recode, you know. So like, so they just stumble through, you know, their careers. And so JJ was really hardcore about like, and we're like, dude, that's such a weird like problem or these. And then he had another one that was like resource management where he would like manage work into a queue. And again, I can't even explain it. I'm not that smart. But he would like, and he was like, oh, just do this and it's recursive. And then you do this thing. And what's the big O notation? I'm like, I'm not a CS person. I don't know jack about this thing. And so then, but he would ask very simple like coding questions that would drive, look for incredible like raw engineering like coding talent.
Got it.
And then for the UI people, the question that I always ask is how would you, and again, I could not do this myself, so I feel a little unfair asking the question, was how do you get 60 frames per second scrolling in a list, an infinitely long list on an iPhone? Which is, so it's really hard to get like super fast scrolling on a long list because you have to reuse the cells, I guess, to maintain memory and reuse CPU. Again, I know enough to be dangerous, not enough to build it. But was good enough to basically, if the person didn't say reuse cells and manage memory and limit CPU usage, I knew they were not on the right track. And I'm like, oh, thanks for the not the right answer, right? And I'd release them. But yeah, so we would just ask, we had a couple standard questions that we'd ask, but looking for raw engineering talent. And then just cool people. Like we get them on the phone, we're like, do we like them? And we had one guy come in for a DevOps position, and incredible guy. Programming, had all of the skills, and he was going to move out from Colorado. And he's like, he leans back in his chair at the interview, and he's like, I got a 6-inch rule. We're like, okay. He's like, if there's ever 6 inches of snow in Colorado, I need a few days off. And we're like, dude, really? And we're like, you're the DevOps guy. And I'm like, that's just not going to work. Like, we need you to be on site, like, to keep the servers running and stuff. But we have it, and then I'll give you one more. We had a couple really good stories. Because we're interviewing an Android guy, and we're like, oh, let's pull out your phone. And we always like, hey, show us a couple of your favorite apps. Like, just talk me through mobile. Like, he pulls out an iPhone, and he's like, you're Android, right? Yeah. He's like, well, I build games for people, and I don't play them. Not the right kind of dude, right? And so like, you had folks that just didn't get it, right? Like, and so those, so they might have been incredibly smart, but just didn't have the right vibe for what we were trying to build. And we wanted people that were passionate about their craft and really, enjoyed what they were doing for doing it, not just like, hey, I'm doing it for a job because I need to correct the bug. So we made a couple bad hires, but not too many. 3.
How fast did you realize that they were not the right hires for the team?
Weeks, usually. Yeah, within a few weeks, like you could tell, and then you give them a chance and work it out. And
yeah,
one decided to leave to go pursue another type of career, completely out of tech. One was giving us too much good advice, telling us how to reorganize our company and stock. And we're like, dude, just work to do over there. We're busy. And then another one had problems showing up to work. Wow,
impressive. And so,
and then the days they'd show up, they'd sit like by themselves, and you're like, dude, it's like a family. It's like 12 of us. The office isn't that big. Like it was like this. It's like we're all sitting there. Like, can you sit? No. Whatever.
And so you got your team together, and you started building this product called Acompli.
Yeah.
And what's one of the coolest things about Acompli is that immediately when they started launching, you had a beta launch. Beta, that's how you pronounce it in American. You started releasing on a weekly basis, whatever it takes.
We started releasing every couple days. Started initially, and then we're like, that's pretty good. And they're like, that feels kind of weak. Everybody in Agile says you got to do a 2-week sprint. So we're like, I'm get fired up Jira, and I'm all excited. Built the 2-week sprint, and then I'm like, nobody's doing jack shit for 8 days. And I was like, nobody's checking. Then on the last Thursday before all the code comes in, and I was like, dude. And week after week, every 2 weeks, I'd see this. The second Thursday, all the code would come in, and then Friday, we'd furiously try to sort it out. And we're like, let's try 1-week sprints. And then sure enough, all the code would come in on Thursdays. And so at least we get code every Thursday. And so we kind of rolled with that. And now it's a little more smooth. But
how did you get there? Like, I'm thinking, for us with Marco as first-time founders, it was very hard in the beginning to set goals, for the entire team and for us, right? And that's where there were so many excuses, for example, coming up. Hey, we can't do this because we're blocked by this. How did you get over that? And you said no matter what, I want weekly release, and that's it.
Yeah, that was it. And there a lot of yelling and tears and stuff. I mean, clearly it wasn't hey, we just drew.
Did you cry?
Might have. I don't.
Aww.
I don't think so. I definitely had some days I was so pissed at Javier. I remember screaming at him so mad I started to cry.
Was it Javier's idea to have a weekly release no matter what?
I don't know. We kind of we said that we're shipping on Friday and we're not going home until we ship it. And that's kind of how.
And Friday is usually the
Friday was
day.
the end of the week. That's the same in Estonia, right?
Yeah.
Just teasing. No. So we released on Friday, and then everybody would switch from testing the dev app to the staging app and test Saturday and Sunday, and we'd sit there and we'd have a party, we'd sit around a table with beers and everybody test the app, send email, reply, oh shit, reply's not working, and that kind of thing. And then as we got a little bigger, we're like, this is not going to scale, so I started looking for QA vendors, and this is where you'll get to come into the story, right? QA vendor. Yeah.
Really?
I know.
Yes.
And then, so then we started looking for QA folks. So we would do this weekly testing, then we'd ship on Monday. And then on Monday, we're like, well, what happens if you found a bug? And we're like, well, we'd either fix it. You have 4 hours to fix it. And because we'd ship it roughly noon, yet you come in at 8-ish. And you'd have 4 hours to fix it, or revert whatever you did last week to unfix it, right? Because we're like, look, you only worked for 4 days. How could you ruin the whole build and not be able to fix it in 4 hours? And so that's kind of how the model, and we would just keep saying that, look, you broke it, fix it, whatever. And the other thing was that we knew that what we shipped last week was working, so if we find some new bug, we're like, well, was it there last week? Yeah, people didn't complain, keep going, right? And so that gave us that model that it was an incredibly, freeing thing. And then we said, hey, how can I get some help? And we had spun up a team in India, and so I had 2 different companies, and my buddies and the guy that was running the office of Vishwesh in India spun up 2 local, we call them body shops, where they just apply bodies to a job, to go and do some testing and bang on these apps. And then at the same time, Kyle, who was the CEO of Keen.io, was wearing a Testlio sweatshirt. Or a shirt. I can't remember if it was a sweatshirt or a shirt. You guys were probably still cheaper back then. It's probably a t-shirt and not a sweatshirt.
It was a t-shirt, right. Yeah.
Now they're upgraded. They got all the lion gear and it's all super awesome. But yeah, so I think the lions weren't even around then. But he had a t-shirt on, and my co-founder saw it, and he's like, Testlio, what is that? Is that a testing thing? Henrikson's up there yelling at this, testing company. And they're like, yeah, it's awesome. Kristel's awesome. I met her in Techstars. And we're like, all right, I'll call them. And so they were pretty new. We called them and said, hey, I need you guys to do some testing, and I'll pay you almost nothing, because that's what I'm paying these guys in India. I pay them way more than nothing now. Probably not more than Michelle's. They're like, well, not enough. You want more. But, same idea. They were like, I was like, hey, let's just go. And so I would bake them off against each other. So every week we'd give them the build. And I had told the other guys, hey, find me your best bugs, you find me your best bugs, and they all just would, and they're like, well, no, we need to know the app and instructions. And I was like, I don't know, it's an email app. Go figure out how to use it. If you don't know how to use email, fire your testers. They're not smart. And that was literally what I would tell them, and they're like, no, we need the test plan. And I was like, then write one. You write a test plan. And they're like, well, what do we have to write? And I was like, all right. So whatever. So they basically, and Testlio was like, yeah, that's awesome. No problem. We'll write the test plan. They're super hungry, right? We'll bang it out. We'll do whatever, test whatever. And then the next week, a different set of testers were on. They were rotating through because they're trying this model. And I realized that the same testers that they were having, dude, these guys are awesome upstairs.
Yeah, there's a fireworks order for you.
Oh, I thought it was like a shuffleboard contest. Now I feel famous. So the model, they were using the same 2 testers at this body shop every week, testing, and they were finding the same kind of bugs. I found this thing, and then they would find the same bug 40 different times. I put in this character, doesn't work. If I put in this character, I'm like, dude, I know if you put in special characters in the subject field, the app will crash. And the dude had listed out like 70 bugs. You're like, God, every character they could find emojis. And, I was like, dude, this is terrible. And then Testlio was being much more creative and like finding like bugs, like the stuff you guys were like hit the button like 30 times and it crashed. And I was like, oh, that's a good one. Like I'll give you credit for that. And then they got a little hooked on that one because then they're like, oh, we found another place in settings. If we drill the button, we could crash it. And I was like, all right. Chill out on the settings. If it's in the main app, that counts, not in the settings part. And so then pretty quickly Testlio rose to like, hey, this is like, they get it, right? And I never had to write test plans. And Javier's like, well, who's writing all the test plans? Like, oh, they're writing it. He's like, well, what did you tell him? I'm like, well, I told him it's an email app. Go figure it out. And he was like, really? And he's like, yeah. Well, yeah. So it kind of just stumbled my way into it. It was awesome. And then I was like, hey, I need this to do this kind of testing. And I'm like, hey, can you actually make it so every week that reply email works? Because that's a really crappy regression when we ship our betas and we're not getting reply email. Like people they want that feature to work. And so like, all right, no problem. And so then we kind of split it up. So they would run like 30% of something of the testing was what we called the smoke test, which is the test that I would get if I would get fired if any of these 10 things broke, like reply, forward, create event, launch app, log in. So they would test the smoke test, and the rest was this exploratory testing where I'm like, just break it. Bang on the app and rotate people through. So every week, if we get a new tester, that's awesome. Because that's like the App Store, right? And so now it's my rap, like, oh, exploratory testing is awesome because it's like the App Store. You don't get to pick your users, just like we don't get to pick our testers, and they don't get bug blind. And then over time, we've refined it. Like there was this report that I was building. I think this is now I'm fast forwarding into Microsoft, but there was this report I was building, and one of the PMs made this big PowerPoint of all the stats, and I sent it to, I don't know, Mark or somebody. I'm like, hey, can you guys go build this every week? Like, just take this report. And they're like, yeah, it's not really what we do. And so then we came up with this analytics thing, and so like, it's how do we do stats on the thing, and like they're producing like read the reviews and find the bugs, and so you guys were the most flexible in terms of like figuring out like whatever.
We were really hungry for the business,
it's
obviously.
No, but it worked.
I think the good thing was that we were really competing with another company as well, and we're like, whatever it takes, we're just going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure at some days you thought I was insane, right? Because I'm reporting bugs, and Mark was like, I'm fixing it. I'm like, it's not, the Jira thing's not working again. And then now, I haven't, it was kind of embarrassing. I tried to log
on it, and Accompli was actually one of our first subscription customers.
We were first. I always tell the story that we were the first, but like, you should probably correct my data.
No, it is. You were the first.
And that
was like actually a turning point for Testlio as well, because that's where we realized how can we build like a subscription business instead of just doing on and off contracts with different customers. And so Kevin was always like super pushing us like to the next level and thinking about testing on a higher level, not just like doing like running the test plans, but just thinking about QA in a higher level in terms of like, okay, how can we, like if we think about the user feedback, like let's pull in the reviews from the App Store and Play Store and see what's like how the users actually think, so we can get more data when we do our testing, because we were on a fast train and we were always on the train, not behind the train.
Yeah. Don't want to get run over by the train. Don't want to be in front of the train.
We never.
And so it's a dark spot. And so I was
no matter what.
Yeah, so it was cool. Like it was, and I just kept throwing out requirements, and you guys always did it, and it was awesome. And my whole thing was like, have anybody read like Tim Ferriss, this 4-hour work week, like work never kind of thing? Like I love that shit. And so like I'm like all about like productivity hacks, like how can I not do my emails, or how can I not do this, or how do I get to those kind of tricks? And like so I always think about like when I get a job, it's like how can I get somebody else to help me? I think I used to say, how do I get somebody else to do it? But I'd say, how do I get somebody to help me? And so Testlio was helping me with quality. So I was like, and I would just like, oh, customer found a bug. And I would just forward it to Marco. You know, like you get like an email coming in from a customer. I'm like, I don't know. You guys go find this bug. And it was great. And so like you kind of turned into quality as a service, right? Where it's like, hey, the whole quality, not just like, kind of banging through a bunch of steps like, robots, right? But like, actually like thinking of quality as a solution and saying, look, people are complaining in the App Store, they're, we're seeing this kind of like feature requests in user voice. Like how do you organize all that into like a single kind of thoughtful plan? And it worked out pretty good, and it's grown.
And so for this entire 1.5 years, you were on this fast moving train, like releasing on a weekly basis, no matter what, which I think is so impressive, because I still see so many companies out there like saying, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, because we can't release it this time because we have this thing blocking us, and you did it no matter what. And like, I'm just trying to understand like where did it come from?
I just realized that it worked, because like it was incredibly like powerful. Because again, I'm not smart. Like think about it, I'm not a good developer, and so like I have to come in on Monday and the app is broken. Like Testlio found a bug or the app is broken. And I'm like, I need to ship it on Monday. And I'm like, how can I convince the developers to fix it in 4 hours? And like having only a week of work, I'm like, well, you fixed it and broke it in a week. Like you have 4 hours, either take it off or put it on, like fix it or go backwards. And that became an incredibly powerful way to have that conversation. It was like, hey, like, and it was just, and so that became like, well, that's all I have to ask for is just ship every week. And then once we started to get in that mode, developers started to self-censor their work. So if like you had a really risky thing coming in and you're like, oh, it's sort of jank, like in the traditional like enterprise world, you're like, check it in, let QA find the bugs, and I'll sit back and drink a beer and wait for the code to come back. But that doesn't work when you ship it on Monday, and you're like, now your Monday's screwed because you shipped crappy code. And so what the magic of that trick was you would say, hey, look, I'm kind of this is a little questionable code. You're like, oh, wait a week. And you're only waiting a week. You're not like waiting a month or 6 weeks or whatever your traditional cycle is. You're only waiting a week. It's fine. And then you fix it. And so then if you're really confident and you think it's good, then you'll push it in. And that works today, even at the scale right now with 100 people. Like you see it all the time. Like, oh, this one's not ready.
100 million downloads as well. So you have.
Yeah, that's just on Android too.
And that's on Android, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, got to double it.
So they reached 100 million users on Android, which is like seriously, bravo.
Cool. A lot of people. So now it works at the scale out now with 100 developers, 100 plus developers, where they're like, oh, I don't know if this is good. You'll see them discussing it in the chat channel, like, oh, this PR needs a little more work, or this doesn't feel good, and they'll kind of let it go. And it's like, it's a smooth way. And so by one corollary, so when people say like, for us, they're like, oh, at Microsoft, tell this like, hey, we ship every week and it's magical and unicorns and hearts and stuff. And they're like, yeah, you and your little toy, like a mobile app that's only been around for 2 years, like come talk about our code base that's 30 years old. And so then I got one of those. So now the team that works on Outlook Mac joined under the org. So we have Outlook Mac mobile, so iOS, Android, and Mac. And they had this 25-year-old code base. It's been shipping as part of Office and Mac, and incredibly complex. I mean, the build times are like 12 hours. Like it's insane to like a clean build is because it's like, that much code. It's got all compiled down and crazy. And even on crazy server farms that, the biggest boxes that we compile on these trash cans, like the Mac Pros or whatever. So we have like stacks and stacks of trash cans. Like every developer has a trash can pimped out with like a RAID array of SSDs on their desk. Because just to do the code pull is like 3 hours or something to pull the code from the depot down to your drives. It's so much code. It's gigs and gigs and gigs of code. So when I was like, hey, of source code, right? Like that's insane. And so then I was like, hey, we're going to ship weekly. And they're like, oh, dude, the build's like 8 hours, like this, and they were currently on and they, imagine they were shipping, every 3 years, kind of traditional Office, had moved to like what they called monthly, which was actually every 2 months, because they would build for a month, ship, but then it would actually not go out. It would like then sit in QA, hotfix until they get it ready, and then they would actually ship that build about a month later. So it was really they were shipping every month, but a 2-month-old build. And so I was like, we're just going to ship every week, and we're going to ship to real users, and we're going to take support tickets directly. And they're like, well, it takes 8 hours. I'm like, great, that's fine. So if it takes that long to build, then if you need to release on Friday, start on Wednesday. So they need to so code for 2 days and then ship for 3, and that's what they did. To start with. And now it's much better because they've got the system, but it's incredible. They used to hotfix on average twice a month, the production build. Their crash rates are lower than they've been in 10 years. And it's all around this, like, nobody's worried about missing the bi-monthly train. They're like, hey, because it's next week it'll come. If a customer goes crazy and complains, they're like, great, no problem, we'll fix the bug. We put it in the release, and we have Insider Fast that comes out every week, Insider Slow that comes out every month, and then production that comes out every month plus a week. So it's like you pick and the users pick the channel. We have tens of thousands of people. I mean, we have millions of users using the Mac client, and we have tens of thousands of them beta that take it and give us great feedback. And so those two things, like, it's possible, right? Like, if it takes you more than a week to do your build and your process, like, that seems too long. So, like, I'm sure you can get it done. So just reduce the dev cycles. And then over time, you'll, like, figure out how to, like, work back to that model. But they've been doing this for, 8 months now, and it's been incredible. And then we're like, hey, they need testing on the weekends. Great, we'll send it to Testlio. So Testlio tests the Mac product now as well.
So no matter what the problem, you will always find a solution.
Yeah, I mean, because you take away the constraints, right? Because they're like, oh, I can't ship on Friday. The build takes too long. Great, then start on Wednesday. They're like, oh, well, we're only coding for 2 days. That's fine. Like, and you have to be like flexible to have that discussion and like, oh, that's, yeah, just go. And then the PMs are like, whoa, I don't understand. And we're like, no, it's gonna be good. And then now there's no longer this tension between engineering and PM because there's always like, hey, let's go build this awesome feature. And they're like, let's go fix the bugs because the customers are complaining about the one we built last week first, and then we'll build the feature. And the data is all there to support that because there's no debate. Because the old days was like, oh, you'd ship a release, it's been out a month, like the code's completely diverged. And you think of this like, I have a better word for it, but I always keep calling like code baggage or code backlog. Like the amount of code that's been written that's not running on customers' hands. And you want that to be minimal. So imagine like whatever, like think of all the code that your developers have written and how much of that is not running with the customer on the live site today. So what has been written, it's like in some process of like, it's still in the factory, right? So it's kind of like, I think it's Kaizen, what's the thing, the Japanese like super awesome model of like just-in-time development, just-in-time like product delivery. Like imagine that with software. Like you just want the minimal amount of software in flow so that it's like quickly gets through the pipeline and gets out to customers so you can get feedback on it. And then that feedback powers everything else, right? And so the other problem was support, right? Like support would go to this department in towers of people in other countries to collect all that feedback. And they were really just a monster Band-Aid. So they would be like, oh, no matter what the problem was, they would make sure that it didn't get back to engineering. Do this, do backflips, try this, call that, reboot, like the massive IT script.
And you were always very fast in your
yeah, so our feedback was not that way. We're like, I'm like, that doesn't work for me. Like,
because
yeah, they would come back to support and you'd get like a month later, they'd get this like PowerPoint of like, here's the top things that have been happening over the last 3 months with your product. And you're like, dude, that code's gone, doesn't even line up with the feedback. Yeah. And then so we switched to in-app support. And so the support tickets come in right to the engineering. And so if they release a bad build, like literally the support tickets look like that chart on fire. Like they get all this fire, like, whoa, pull the build back, revert it, and they know right away. And so then it's great. They fix it right away. If you know right away, you fix it right away, you reduce the pain, right? Like the actual pain and suffering of a customer is really not the pain, it's the pain over the duration. So if you can fix it quickly, and we used to joke, we ship lots of bugs still today in Outlook and Acompli, but we fix them before most people notice, right? Our servers always go down, things are flaky out on the network, we have VM problems, but if we can detect it faster than most of the users notice, it's the same as not creating it. And so, and that is much more fun way to work because like you're working on the thing that matters versus like sitting in a war room debating like, oh, what's going to happen or how are we going to change the push? No, just ship. And like the this, I don't know if somebody, I'm going to steal it from somebody, but somebody said like this notion of fail forward. We don't roll back, we roll forward. Like the fix is always put the fix in and keep moving. The train does, you never see trains like big ass trains backing up. Like it's just, that's super hard. And that's what it's kind of when you're rolling back a huge software release, that's what you're doing. You're trying to back up a train. Like there's all this baggage and, oh, the database wasn't designed to go backwards and users' emails are going to have the wrong date on them, like just messy stuff. Where if you're like, hey, if the thing's always fixing forward, yeah, it's a cleaner way to work.
So I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Seriously,
no more
I could
scripted?
Talk with you forever. Yeah. No, I seriously.
I'm kidding.
I had my questions prepared.
But I
some
talked
of them
too much.
I already. No. I already asked some of the questions, which is good. But who wants to ask questions? We have a microphone here somewhere as well. Perfect. Thanks, Christina. Awesome. So we got a first question.
Uh-oh.
Over there.
Somewhere in there.
Kadri from Clambeat.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm going back to the time where you said that you had an idea and over the weekend you built a rough prototype to present to investors. How or did you test the market, somehow the market need?
No, and it was probably exaggerated. It probably wasn't over the weekend. It was probably 10 days or something. But I mean,
still,
it was quick. We did not test the market. We didn't go and say, hey, we're going to try to build an email app. We knew the market existed. Billions of people used email. Microsoft had a $12 billion subscription business selling email called Office 365. Google had a $1 billion business selling, even with the very few people pay for Google apps, but the ones that do, mostly are small companies. It was a $1 billion business, and we knew just like everybody here has a phone, and everybody here has email on their phone. So we knew there was the market was there. The question was there a market need that we could capitalize on? And looking at Vlad, so we kind of backed into it, partly because we'd been in the space for long enough. We were super convicted there was a spot. What we didn't know is if we could make money and make it work and bubble above the crowd, and that was there's probably another topic on like how we do marketing. And like, I mean, I'm super anal about like, I went and Google searched all of our executives and made sure that our profiles were dialed in. So like you couldn't find any like crazy party picture, you know, like it just looked like pro. And so when somebody would search us, they would find the right page. And so like a lot of that marketing. So the market testing we did was really about managing our image to make sure that when people looked us up or saw something, or that every blog article we got, we instantly updated the recruiters like flow to be like, oh, as seen on TV, you know, kind of like to keep the momentum and like build on it, and try to tie yourself back to like trends and hotness and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Just raise your hand. We can.
Yeah.
Oh.
He's got
Oliver,
the mic.
Go for
Hi.
it.
About reducing the release cycle, where did you get the idea from? Why I'm asking is because I think I read a book by Johanna Rothman who described a situation when she's a consultant, described a situation when her customer complained that they're releasing lower and lower quality items, to which she said, well, now we're going to switch the release to 1 week. To which the customer said, no, it's impossible. Okay, in that case, let's do it in 3 days.
Yeah, yeah.
So where did you get the idea?
Yeah, so I don't read books. I do listen to audiobooks. I don't actually read. But I don't think I've read that book. It's the Agile thing. Like if you could read Agile sprint length, and like 2 week is the default that kind of comes up. And so we kind of, nobody does Agile the same. It's all kind of some hack, right? We called it like, we had some name for it, but it was like not Agile, right? Like sort of Agile-like, right? Or Agile fall. Like, everybody's picks their own words for it. But yeah, we started with, every few days, and we're like, that's too often. At the time, it was like my co-founder, our wives, like kind of using the app, like a
and
really
your
small
team
group.
only grew to like 20 people before
The
you
total was 18. Yeah, so when we first
18.
started, 18 was the total. But
so
when we
the team
first started,
was still fairly small, and you got so much done
4 or
with
5
such
people.
a short amount
4 or
of
5
time
people was the core team.
for very high.
Yeah, so and then we went to
Yeah.
2 weeks, and then we backed down to 1 because I realized that all the code was happening on the 15th day or the 13th day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And most of your team was engineers, right? You only had like
So I'm sorry. So there was 20 people total, 21
Yeah.
people total, 18 was in engineering.
Got it.
And that's counting myself and Javier and JJ as engineers. JJ and Javier wrote code.
Yeah.
I never wrote code.
Awesome.
But I
Gleb,
consider
go
myself
for it.
still an engineer.
Thank you. You mentioned Tim Ferriss. I listened to a podcast, 4-Hour Work Week.
Yeah.
Listen to you, I hear, stumble into, tried this, fail at that, you being very self-deprecating, very humble. And I guess what I'd like to see, the question here, how much deliberate practice, how much intelligent design went into your career? Have you acquired a skill over time by hard labor? Because, listening to you saying, how can I get somebody else to do it and all that? How can I, without the humility,
Yeah.
where's your actual skill and how much effort did you put into that? If we take it seriously, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, totally. That's a tough question. I'm not even going to use the good question one because I actually don't know the answer off my head, so I'm going to think for a second. I don't know. I think I'm not afraid to fail like that if that's a skill, but with the deliberate practice comes into like, I love finding solutions. Like if I think of myself as like a little kid and like, my mom would always I go back to this, like, what have I been doing for a long time? I go back to when I'm a child, right? And so I think like we'd like have these like go-karts and little motorcycles and stuff, and we would spend 90% of the time fixing them, right? We would fix them, tinker, solution it, get on it, and ride it till it breaks, which would usually be about 10 minutes, because we would just keep going off bigger and bigger jumps until it breaks, and then so like finding solutions, but I can't think of like a I don't know, other than like looking for solutions, but a specific skill like. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an awesome programmer. Like,
People manager?
I can read people really well. I think like I can kind of figure out like what's a situation. So I've done pre-sales stuff, and like I was the engineer that always was like, hey, the salespeople wanted to take me because I was like I could talk and I could like know about what it was doing. Because you get like the engineer that like is really really intelligent, but like a rocket scientist and has trouble like explaining like being chill and cool and stuff. I don't know.
So you're like Richard Feynman of pre-sales.
Yeah.
But is that pardon me.
Yeah.
I'm interrupting a little
Please,
bit.
push me.
You're, I'm still getting a sense that you're being very humble, and obviously you've achieved great success, and I'm always with people, I try to understand what makes them tick in a way. So is it like, we talked about goals a little bit here. If to fulfill a goal, you have to put deliberate practice, like focus on something, what are the goals that you're setting, and how do you get better at achieving those goals? Like, what are the key things you look at?
Yeah.
I'll try it from a different angle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's reasonable. So I think the one thing, so I'm super, like I'm inbox zero, like super anal about breaking down tasks and organizing things and then managing them. And I'll give a small anecdote that might help is like when we were getting acquired, that there's lots of lawyers involved and lots of questions. And so they would send us these long like punch lists of like, give us all these documents or find all these things. And Javier would literally, he was so pissed. And he was like, dude, why are they asking? I'm like, dude, this is the best. And he's like, you're so weird. Because I would get super zen. When there's a list, I go to work. And I'm like, let's knock them off. All done. And I would happily do that list. They would tell me to do craziest stuff. And I'm like, no problem, we'll do that. And we would knock through the list. And so I get super zen when there's like a list. And I can just feel the satisfaction of checking things off. Where my co-founder is like, no, I just want them to stop asking questions. Like, I'm like, when there's a list, we shouldn't be having conference calls. Let's go do the list and then start the next call, right? And so tracking things and kind of like, and then I guess another skill would be like maybe asking the right question. Like a lot of times I don't know the answer, I'm sitting in a room of people that know many, many more things than I know. But if I could learn something from everybody, and if you can kind of create the right question or ask the question. And sometimes I'm a little snarky about it, or a lot of times, and I sort of set people up, in that sense. Like somebody was pitching me on their startup, and they're like, "Oh, I have a team of 10 people," and I'm like, "Wow, your engineers must be really ashamed to work for you." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Not a single one of them mentions your company on LinkedIn in their profile." Because I'm a creeper. I went and looked, and there was not a single other person that mentioned it, right? But like that instantly was able, a way to like get him to admit that he was really a one-person company, right? And so I think in a lot of those cases, like I sort of enjoy that awkward moment where that question hits them, and maybe that's a dark thing. I don't know. Like, but I had another when I was interviewing somebody. They said they worked at Netflix, but I went and looked at their LinkedIn, and it just didn't add up that they would have left Netflix, because I have friends that work there and they pay incredibly well. Like, and you would never leave unless you got fired, like after a couple months, in my view. And so I called one of my friends and said, go look them up in the directory. And they're like, nope, not in the directory. So definitely got fired, like nowhere in the directory, doesn't exist in the system. So I get on the phone with them, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, hey, so tell me about your, what are you doing at Netflix these days? Oh yeah, doing this. I'm like, oh, and so you still work there, right? Yeah, definitely, 100%. So I call your boss, and then I'm, gave him all the rope to back out of it. Never, and he's, went down. And then finally I was like, okay. So I called a friend of mine who looked you up in the directory, and you're not there. Could you explain like how you'd be the only employee I ever know that still works at Netflix that's not in the directory? And then that like awkward moment where he's trying to come up with the answer, like I enjoy that because I know that like trap set. And so I think I enjoy asking those questions. But again, with the solution of saying, hey, I'm trying to hire somebody, I want you to be truthful and tell me what you're thinking, right? And so. But I don't know. It's a really good question. You're gonna make me think for a lot. Thank you.
Gleb has very good questions.
Thank you for asking the question. So I don't know. Yeah.
Any other questions, or maybe we'll take one more questions and then Kevin will stay here for a couple of more minutes.
Sure.
And jump on him and ask questions. So Marco, go for it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ask my question, but I want to also let Meelis ask the question. I know background a bit, so I'm gonna ask about Microsoft. And
sure.
I know when you first started working there, like the whole organization is political, right? There's like huge structures, and the way you were kind of thinking about it is like you don't want to get like under it, right? Get into this, and knowing you, I think what you're not political, right? You're not playing around the fire. You're basically jumping into the fire and finding a solution. And how do you feel now, basically, in Microsoft after 1.5 years, I think?
Almost 2 years.
Yeah, it's been over 2 years. So that's a good question. I think so I'm calculating. I wouldn't say I'm not political. Like, I don't want to get into debates with people. I'd rather figure out a way to solve it without having to get into like a political type of debate. So ask leading questions to figure out who's going to agree with you before you engage. There's lots of doctor no's in big companies, like people that will tell you, oh, we tried that, no, or like some department you go and ask for approval, they're like, oh, definitely not, right? Can't do that, right? And so in a lot of cases, just do it. and then say, oh, sorry, I didn't know you were supposed to get out. So some of those things and again, as the new guy, play the new guy card of like, I didn't know any better. And so a lot of the things you kind of stumble through that way. But I think over time, Microsoft is full of incredibly, incredibly smart people. And I think I'd worked at a lot of big companies before, and so they're super well-intentioned. I think a good example was there was a team that was responsible for a key part of the release cycle, and there was a team of like 10 people to do something that used to take us about 22 seconds at Accompli. And they were like, no, it's going to take a week, and for you, we'll give you a special service. It'll only be one day, and we're like, no, we need 22 seconds. Like, this doesn't make sense. And so, like, it wasn't that they weren't smart, but they had built, a multi-decade career building this organization and all these checks and balances when a week didn't matter if they were shipping every 3 years to Best Buy, right? When Windows was shipping every 3 years, like whether a week or 10 days, it doesn't matter, but now we're shipping the speed of mobile. So, like, some of those conversations, I don't know if they were political, but you had to address them, right? Because it was like if our release cycle's a week, you can't take a week to approve, and you take a day, that's 20% of our total time to do your piece. And so in some of those cases, you kind of had to hit them head on. And then, I called it the call dad thing, like, hey, just keep going to the boss's boss. And you're like, look, 22 seconds, 7 days, like, come on, help me out here, right? And be reasonable about it. But yeah, kind of, so every situation was a little different, but I think it's half of it is ask for forgiveness, just kind of do it, act as if it's your job to make the decision. And then half of it is probably this, calculating way of how do you compare, like, and we had a great example because we're like, look, we were doing this as a small company, and yes, it's a small company, but it shouldn't be impossible. Like, we should be able to do this at a large company, so good.
I'd like to know, you've been an engineer, manager, and entrepreneur. So, and you say like you're not the best coder. How have you earned the trust of the coders or engineers, or kind of why do they like you or don't like you? How's the kind of, being this direct, like solutions focused? What do they think about your ex-colleagues, new colleagues?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, up until this point, I never got performance reviews really. Like, somebody would say, oh, they don't like me or whatever, but Microsoft has an incredibly like detailed performance review process. And so, as you can imagine, this kind of direct makes some enemies. Some people aren't super comfortable getting these kind of direct things. So the way I counteract that is I ask like 50 people for feedback. Where normally like you ask like the 3 or 4 people you work with and like kind of a traditional peer review, but I'm like, there's no cost. I just keep entering in more emails. So I'm like 50. So my boss is like, I've never ever seen this much feedback. And like 90% of it is like the most like Kevin's the best. Like if they're on your team and they've worked with you, because they're like, and I'll tell you why they think that. But there's like 10% that's like worst person on the face of this earth. I mean, like really dark stuff. Like if his co-founder wasn't there, nobody would even work with their team. Like, I mean, and again, like some of these situations that are political, I had to push people probably harder than they were super comfortable with. And so I probably deserve it. But my key kind of thing that I think is I'm incredibly responsive. So even sitting here, like as my phone goes off, like I have this incredible anxiety to respond to somebody who woke up in the US at a weird hour and want to just do whatever it is to respond to it. Like, so I love the notion of being incredibly responsive. So I think my team enjoys that, like super quick, like and my whole notion of the way I do email is I respond to never have the email come back. Like a lot of people write emails to like engage in long discussions and let me tell you all my thoughts and 17 bullet points. Like that's not my style. Like mine is like, this is what needs to be done. Here's my decision. If it's on my job or if it's like not mine, massively delegate, right? Nope, it's this person's decisions and I fully trust whatever they say. If they need help, they'll come back to me, right? And so people love that working for me because I don't try to like micromanage. In fact, I'm like the Mac team that I took over, they're like, he said to me once, he was like, you're like my worst and best boss. Like the best in the sense that like, you let me do whatever we want, we just get it done. But the worst in the sense you've shown me how terrible like we've been, in the world of before of like used to check and balances and prepare for meetings. You never prepare. I just walk in like this and tell you what I think, and that's what it is. And if we need to go research it, we'll do that after, and somebody will take that. But I think the currency of a software company is shipped code, and the people that create shipped code are developers. So everybody at a company, from marketing to legal to product managers, should be delivering and increasing the efficiency of creating currency in the company, which is shipped code. And a lot of people forget that. You'll be like, you're just asking questions that don't matter, or you're, and so I'm really good at like, or I think I am, of like providing resources. Like they're like, we need new monitors. I'm like, order 5. And my admin's like, well, you just need 1. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want the next 4 people that asked. I want them to be sitting right there. So I walk into like our offices in New York, and like, I'm like, where's the Mac charger? And she's like, oh, we have some in the thing. I'm like, no, go plug them in there. Like, every conference room should just have charge. Like, you should never have developers being like, oh, my battery already died, or like I'm giving a presentation and there's no adapters. I'm like, buy 20 of them. They're like $4. Go buy a bunch of them. We have a gajillion dollars. Nobody should be like, oh, I can't find the HDMI adapter. And I'm like, just put them everywhere. IT guys will try to like zip tie them to the wire. Like, there's all these trick things. I'm like, no, just put them everywhere. Like, make it so that they're like markers. There should just be everywhere. And so getting resources for people like the instant they need them, and proactively thinking ahead, right? Like in Accomplete was like ordering snacks and like, having drinks and all of the food there. You never want to run out of food, right? Like engineers run on Red Bull, and we had one guy was like, we called him Diet Coke Brian. My 4-year-old named him that. And I mean, he would come in the morning and he would grab like as many he could get in his hand, 3 or 4, and he'd walk, and that's like, and those would be gone before like 9, 10. And I mean, he'd just plow. He was awesome. And so my daughter was in charge. She was 4 years old at the time. And she was in charge of loading all the sodas. And she was like, always load the Diet Cokes first, because she knew that Brian was one of the early guys to get to the office. And she was like, if Diet Coke Brian gets in there and there's not like, you're going to like lose minutes, because he's going to look around, right? And so I think my thing is, understanding people, be human, right? I think people inside my team generally feel relatively protected, and like that, hey, I'm giving them what they need to stand behind them if they make a bad decision. Say, hey, that was my fault for giving you the paintbrush and letting you paint outside the lines, versus them painting outside the lines. And so, taking the responsibility. There's a great book called Extreme Ownership. It's written by,
we recommend everyone to read it.
It's written by a Navy SEAL guy, and it's all about like, as whenever a team fails, it's always the leader's fault, is basically the summary of the book. And kind of that example of like, hey, if the team's painting outside the lines, it's not because they painted outside the lines, it's because you gave them the paintbrush without the right training, or whatever, right? You didn't do the right thing to make them set up an environment so they could paint inside the lines. And so I think a lot of managing teams is just being human and understanding what people need, and then giving that to them before they even know that, like I have stacks of MacBook Pros sitting under my desk. Why? Because like if ever a laptop goes down, I never, like again, it's like the hammer on the construction site, right? You don't want the hammer to fall out of the craftsman's hands. And it solved a lot of debates. Like when we first got to Microsoft, we never had PMs. It was just the leaders of the company was the PM team. And I was like, oh, wow, PMs. And I'm like, yeah, they're for defensive purposes, and big companies go talk to other PMs, right? But the way that we solved, and now I think we have a pretty good integration, and our PMs are awesome. But I think the thing I always said was that the engineers write the code. And so if there's a debate between an engineer and a PM, it's like, oh, I don't know, he who writes code decides, or he or she who writes code decides. And so if she's going to write the code, then she gets to decide. I don't care what the PMs think or what, somebody thinks. They're writing the code, because the thing is, they've got to fix it, and when the bug comes back, they've got to repair it, they got to maintain it. And that's a very freeing, crystallizing thing, right? So everybody in the office should be at some level this servant leadership to make sure that the thing that you're producing, which is getting code to customers and shipping features, is optimized, right? And so if anybody's building something or doing something to get in that way, they're probably not doing the right thing, or the most optimal thing, I guess.
So everyone has responsibility. But yeah, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today. Seriously, I've been waiting for this moment for the past, how long has it been?
Long
We've
time.
known each other for like
3
2014.
years. Yeah, 3-4 years. Yeah,
Exactly.
so it's been awesome. Yeah, finally made it to Estonia. I've never been to the Baltics. It's pretty cool. I love this area. Like, and you guys brought like the incredible weather the last 2 days. I landed in like Sunday. It was like pouring rain as we flew in, and then like it clears. I'm like, holy shit, this is awesome. It's all green. And then yesterday was incredible. Today we're like out by boats and chilling and having lunch. Like.
But yeah, I think
awesome.
One thing that we can all learn from Kevin is to never be afraid to fail. Like, no matter what you do, just don't care about it. Do it with
but
do it
don't
with
feel bad.
Passion, but don't feel too bad about, because mistakes are human, and that's okay. So
awesome.
Thank you so much for coming. Oh, hold on, I have a. Where's the present? We had a present for you, but I can't find it. Oh, it's here.
It's burning. It's on the fire.
Oh, yeah. We have a pretty funny gift for you, so you can open it up later on yourself.
All right. On the camera,
Maybe you should do it right now. I don't know.
I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.
And then we have a small gift for your wife as well. So, Janice, maybe you can come here as well.
Oh, awesome. Did I get like coal in my socks or something? Oh, yeah.
We've told you the
To
story
keep me
of
warm.
podcast,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I like it.
Awesome.
I like it.
But yeah, Janice, thanks for coming
I
here
like
as
Janice.
well to join us today. And seriously, of course.
Awesome.
Awesome. So thanks everyone for coming seriously. And yeah, you can watch this video on YouTube afterwards as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks.